So I stumbled across this a bit earlier on, and it's 2 hours and 40 odd minutes, so there's no way in hell that I'm going to make a video on the whole thing. There's no way in hell anybody would want to sit through this utter tripe. So I'm going to go through some of it, and, I'll edit in certain bits that I find quite humorous. But, just the premise, the sole premise of this cancerous debate, the Rainbow Unicorn Parliament really are a sack of shit on this country. They're a cancer to this country. There is no question about it. Since day dot, they've exploited this BLM Marxist pish. From day dot, they've exploited this bogus narrative of so-called racial inequality. We had them all in a wee circle jerk a couple of months back now, talking about how everything's too white in a predominantly white country. White this, white that, from Hamza Useless and an asshole sour. And here we have them again. The Equalities and Human Rights Commission with this overweight woman who has a real tendency to piss me off when it comes to talking about racial inequality. So with that being said, let's just hear what's just to say.
Um, Race inequality has been brought back to the fore of people's minds with Black Lives Matter movement on the back of the police violence in the States and
George Floyd, yeah.
the evidence that we're seeing that COVID-19 is impacting disproportionately on Black and minority ethnic communities here. In terms of employment, in the short term, what do we need to do? And how do we plan for the medium and longer term? And if I could go to Dave Black first, please.
Dave Black. What a fitting name, but we're not going to listen to Dave Black because he's boring. Let's move to the first individual. But I love there she talks about what can be done in the short term and what can be done in the medium and long term. So first of all, we're talking about how COVID, quote unquote, supposedly disproportionately affects people that are brown and black because, Clive the coronavirus is, ultimately it's racist. It has to be racism. But then they shift the goalposts and they start talking about what can be done for employment. Well, apart from living in the grounds of a meritocracy, which Scotland is supposed to be, the only other solution I can think of is prioritising browns and blacks to quell said inequality. That's all this can be. And it's interesting because this black individual goes on to talk about, you'll hear yourself.
Thank you, convener. I think I do echo some of the sentiments which have been highlighted by Dev. I think perhaps I can just point out that there is now a very widely shared and rightly so perception that people are inquiry fatigued, people are evidence collection weary, because honestly, the evidence is there. I mean, the inquiries have been done for over the last 30 years or so. I mean, all you need to do one afternoon is just walk into the debating chamber of the Scottish Parliament and see how disturbingly,
Disturbingly.
symbol of Scottish democracy.
Disturbingly, a symbol of Scottish democracy that a predominantly white country has a debating chamber that's full of white people. That's disturbing to this individual. That's a problem to this individual. This indicates inequality to this individual. That indicates a racism. Am I right, New Scot, Mr. New Scot? Where'd you come from, pal? You don't come from Scotland. But I love that. It's disturbing to these people. It's a problem because they don't see themselves in these positions. They want to see themselves because of their in-group preference that we're not allowed to have. Oh no, we need to rectify those wrongs. Turn them into rights, yeah? It's disturbing. You fucking people, man.
In diversity and equality. I mean, you only need to know that the capital city of Scotland, Edinburgh, is yet to register a single BME councillor among its ranks. I mean, the evidence, But
you don't ever look into why that might be. Do these individuals go into these positions and seek out these jobs? Because from what I can gather, especially in the case of Glasgow and Edinburgh, they're screaming out for diversity. I don't think they would waste their time and energy looking into diversity quotas if there was black and browns and all the rest of it trying to get into these positions. But of course, they don't do that. They just assume that because there is a lack of these individuals already in these positions, it's racism. Because everything is racism to these people. How does that prove anything? It doesn't. Not a thing. To have any of these inquiries that he speaks of, the evidence is overwhelming. Is it Does this evidence indicate that somehow the council's racist? No, it doesn't. It just indicates or proves that there's no blacks in there. But the assumption is based on that ground alone that it's due to racism. It's disturbing, apparently.
Basic, whether specific or general, it's abundantly there. I think what we need is when we have processes like what we're having today, is to make sure they are followed up with practical, realistic, and encouraging measures that can instill confidence in the communities. Because some of these processes, they are now becoming almost like cover-ups, for institutions to be seen to be doing something about a problem which is historically urgently requiring to be addressed. I think you, in your opening remarks...
Historical is fucking comical. I mean, come on. How many times do I have to repeat this shit? 2001, it was 2% non-white. In 2011, it was 4% non-white. What are you talking about? It's historical. I mean, how much representation do you expect to see? 2% of the population. Oh.
Convener, you did touch on the George Floyd issue and the Black Lives Matter protest.
Oh, yeah.
I think from my perspective and that of our organizations, those were simply some violent manifestations of, systemic, inherently deep-seated inequality that
Yeah, I'm high on fentanyl, who couldn't breathe before he was put on the ground, would have overdosed irrespective of whether the cops had approached him or not. But that somehow indicates deep-seated inequality. And even if it did indicate deep-seated inequality, what the fuck has that got to do with Scotland? Nothing. But this wanker here silenced whatever from CEE to CEO for the fair justice system for Scotland. Or anything that has the word fair in it, it's safe to assume that they're of the socialist variation. Just leaving that one out there, eh?
We have seen across the world. Here in Scotland, I think we are lucky that we haven't got to the levels that we are seeing in America in terms of the protest movement being as widely established and as
probably because there's not enough of you here yet.
Viciously manifested as it is now in places like America. I think Scotland can actually stay ahead of that by setting the pace, in setting a clear and practically implemented and visibly achieved agenda.
Visibly and practically, he's talking in physical terms here. So we can stay ahead of the pace. We can lead the way, as Dinlitz would say. If we insert blacks and browns and whatnot into positions of power, noticeable positions of power, we can stop any potential protests and whatnot from turning vicious in the future. You see, because apparently all of this, the mass riots and the burning down of cities and whatnot in America, that's got nothing to do with communist agitators. No, that's just because they're trying to have their voice heard. So they're still exploiting the fucking George Floyd case. Months later, they're still running on the back of a Marxist BLM / Antifa agitation process. It's just fucking incredible to me that we have wet wipes in our apartment, like that overweight woman that I put at the start of the video. So, what can we do to make you feel better? It's just ridiculous. Tell them to shut their fucking mouths and get on with their lives.
On addressing equality, just coming back to your question, I think what we have seen as an organization is that some of the processes in place, like the criteria for recruitment, for example, some of these things were set maybe 30 years ago. There is maybe need to revisit the criteria in the recruitment process as
the recruitment process. Here we go.
Practical way of measuring how we can achieve diversity and equality. And the other point
So how are you going to do this? So in the recruitment process, in order to achieve quote unquote diversity and equality, well, the only way that you're going to be able to do that in a majority, I'm sick having to go through this shit. But it's just they repeat themselves, so I have to. I will continue to, right? If you've got 100 people applying for a job, right, and 99 of them are white, and one is black, It stands to reason a white person is more likely to get that job than the black person. But the thing that they do is they look at it in a collective block. So that means that the white man got the job over the black. No, that was 99 white men going up against each other for that job. That is a meritocracy, right? But these people, they don't see it that way. So what we have to do is we have to prioritize browns and blacks because it's not fair, it's racist. No, it's not. It's because you're a minority. It's fucking insanity. You live in a predominantly white country, so it stands to reason that the majority of job applications and whatnot that are going to come in to an employer's office will be white people, ethnic Scots to be more precise in this case, right? Stands to reason. And you want them to just shove all them to the side because my racism. It's just ridiculous. And what's your justification for this? Oh, systemic inequality because of George Floyd. It's just fucking madness.
Just make in closing my remarks is that the apprentice system in Scotland.
Oh, here we go. I think I've covered this before. Or I might not have, so apologies if I haven't. They were talking about specifically BAME apprenticeship schemes about a year or two ago. I mean, I don't know what this guy's going to say here about it, but it's funny because if he's going to greet just now that that's not worked out yet, it remains to be seen. But again, how many BAME individuals go into the apprenticeship system? If there's things in there that have been put in place specifically to prioritise BAME apprentices and they still haven't fulfilled that criteria, that says more about the BAME people themselves, is it not? Fucking hell, I would have jumped at the chance for an apprenticeship. I had one years ago. Anyway.
The apprenticeship system across the board is so focused on young BME people. What about adult BME people?
It's so focused on BME people. And I mean, this is brilliant as well. The apprenticeship system doesn't really do much for anybody over the age of 24. Yes, there is adult apprenticeships, but companies are more likely to take on school leavers because it's more profitable for them. There is systems out there, as I said, and certain organisations and whatnot, where you can get an apprenticeship as an adult. But in broad basis, the broad scheme of things, they kind of do discriminate against adults in general. But this dickhead, again, it's just singling them out. What about focus for the adults? I mean, what about adults in general? Why can't you people work for the greater good? If you're all about equality, focus in general on adult apprenticeship schemes. But no, you want to focus on getting black men to be apprenticeships. Fuck the white man. No, the black man. People.
We have a very significant adult BME population in Scotland, which is still largely marginalised. These are people who are...
Just these buzzwords, they're marginalised. Why? Because we're black. You're fucking not marginalised. I'm sorry for all these spirits. These people... It's embarrassing. It's truly embarrassing, eh? You know, no, it's not actually embarrassing. It's malicious because it would be embarrassing if you believed this, but you don't. That's what makes it worse. You don't believe what you're saying. You damn well know.
Still actively employable, people who can still actively contribute to the economy, to the development of society, but there is no
size was developed. It's now on the way out, but anyway.
Emphasis at all on addressing the inequality that these people still face. And there's also the
fucking inequality. Disparity does not indicate inequality. This is how these people operate. This is how this lefty, commie, socialist type worldview operates. You know, if it's not equal on paper, it's inequality. You know, it's all about equity to these individuals. It's not equality. They say equality, but it's equity.
Last aspect, which is emphasis on supporting those in employment. We know that the figures of in-work BME people, they are not that significant. So how can we focus on supporting people who are just simply not there? We need to focus on getting them into the employment and then
that's why they're not employed. Maybe they're on the dole. I don't know.
Making sure they stay, because there's also a trend whereby once they start going up the steps, people that just fall out. You know, they leave the professions, they come out of the work. Why are they not staying up there once they start going up? So
that's not my problem. It's not Scotland's problem. That's their individual own problems.
Those are some of the issues I think could be addressed.
Aye.
What we need is to have acknowledgement at the highest possible level from the Scottish government, for example, the Scottish Parliament, and all our public institutions such as the local authorities, acknowledging that institutional racism is a problem. It does exist. It's still very much alive. If we get that sort of high-level acknowledgement, I think that's the first point in reviving the perception around this problem. Because if we don't admit that we have a problem, it's very difficult to find solutions for something that doesn't exist as a problem. So that's the starting point. And just to wind up my point on that, we have seen a situation whereby we have something of a chicken and egg situation, whereby the organizations that are taking advantage of their systems that are not inclusive, I mean, they always throw the ball back at the marginalized communities, saying that, for example, we don't get enough applications from BME communities. That's why we don't have many BME people within our employment ranks. Or to say the reason why we are not addressing this problem, which is affecting, the aspirations and prospects of BME communities, is that we never realized there was a problem. I think what we need to do is to make sure that public bodies, they face the same kind of penalties when they fail on their Section 146 obligations. I think we have seen it in the financial services industry. I mean, post the 2008 financial crisis, the penalties around GDPR and the GPA legislation and regulations, whereby companies breach their GDPR obligations, the penalties they face, percentages of their annual turnovers, individuals in senior management facing possible, jail terms. The criminal liability aspect is something that is reformed, those other sectors. We need to see that replicated when it comes to the Equality Act 2010, Section 146, public duty obligations, whereby when public officials fail on their public duty to make their organizations inclusive, they have to face those sort of stiff penalties. I think organizations also have to face the same stiff penalties when they fail on their public duty obligations. I think that's the only way where we can see anything that is linked to institutional racism being radically addressed.
But see, this is the thing that really pisses me off about this, which kind of makes me believe that they do not believe their shit the same. Because if things cannot be done to encourage more, if things can't be done to encourage more BME to go into certain work practices and whatnot, the only way that they claim so-called systemic racism and the only way to achieve equality, quote unquote, is to force companies to not only shove in diversity quotas and BME only shortlists, but to personally penalise these companies if they don't take in enough of these people. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. The problem can't be solved amicably. It has to be done by force. It's just mind-boggling to me. There's a problem out there that could be sorted out, but they don't even want to do that. If there was a problem out there that could be sorted out and whatnot, no, they want to just skip trying to do that. No, they just want to force people into positions that they wish to see them in, whether that be Parliament that's disturbingly overweight just now, according to him, or apprenticeships. Fuck the white man, fuck white adults. White man need to work too, but he's not affected by the COVID crisis. Just the marginalised community. Just to show whole shebang. I am so sick of these circle jerks. And our country goes down the pan over some fake, bogus crisis so they can reshape our society. Queen Thin Lips at the top, getting all the praise under the sun, while all her little minions, her rainbow unicorn delegates, sit there and drill and grovel to minorities who proclaim that they're marginalised, while they also sit there simultaneously alongside radical lefties conjuring up hate crime bills and all the rest of this shit. Our country's going down the pan, completely down the pan. I'm half an hour into this video, and I'm at a point where I feel like we're up to. I'll see. That's all.
Yes, that's what I was referencing to. Yes, I agree with Claire, because BME communities or BME women are over capacity built. We've already got the capacity, so it's not about deficiencies in that particular pool. It's about recognizing that organizations are deficient in their recruitment practices and kind of putting the lens inwards. So yes, in short, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I suppose I would want to just say on behalf of the committee that we are very focused on holding the employers, in particular we're looking at public sector employers in this to account, and we're clear that it's not about black and minority ethnic communities' deficiencies at all. It's about the structures in Scotland that we do need to change.
The systemic.
Laurie, can I bring you in on Fulton's questions, please?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with the statement made by Claire. I think the framing of something like this is very important. I personally feel, is it an equality issue or is it an inequality issue? Because depending on how we frame that would make a big difference as to how we respond to it. I think that the power and the significance of that should not be overlooked. I think there is, echoing some of the remarks that Dave and Silence both made earlier about there not being a problem here. We are open and inclusive as an employer is something that we regularly hear. But I think for me, one of the questions that I would ask or I would challenge is whose responsibility is it? If you have a local authority where there is one individual for that local authority whose job is to focus on equalities, how is that possible? How can that one person be responsible for ensuring that everything that local authority does meets equalities criteria? I think then it's that issue with whose problem is it? Is it one person's problem? Is it everybody's problem? Or by that,
it's fucking none of our problems. Peace. I'm done with this shit.